Thank you, Dr. Bedesi. I extend my own personal good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For some of you, it's very early. Some already I'm seeing on the chat are in California. So I hope you've had your coffee. And those in Bangladesh, I hope you're preparing not a coffee, but maybe a tea to put you in a good mood, not to sleep, but to listen to our very first set of presentations, as Dr. Bedesi has mentioned, very intriguing, very relevant. Uh, with COVID, in some cases being the focus, and in some cases illustrating how other problems are still going that we need to pay attention to. So the first presentation will be given by two members of a large team that had put together looking at comparisons of test modalities for SARS-CoV-2, a comprehensive review. We have Chelsea Dantas and Maya Hadid who will be presenting this to us. Just to give you a little bit of background on Chelsea, Chelsea Dantas is a second-year medical student at St. George's University. She attained her baccalaureate in biology from Seton Hall University in 2019. As a biology scholar, in her sophomore year, she began her research study under Dr. Cosimo Antonassi in molecular binding to the human telomeric repeat sequence. Chelsea looked to further her research career and brings her experience to medical school, where she hopes to find a study eventually that will suit her. The COVID-19 pandemic took a turn on everyone. I think that's an understatement. And the ability to access multiple screening tests for statistical analysis, that sparked an interest in Chelsea. So she's excited to share the results today of this study, along with Maya Hadid. So this is going to be a dual presentation, a duet, if you will. Maya Hadid was born and raised right here in the lovely island of Grenada. She is currently in term 4 of St. George's University School of Medicine and enjoys learning about the clinical aspects of medicine. She's very excited about this particular research project. This is her first research opportunity, and so she is understandably very eager to be involved, not only in this one, but in others to come. So Chelsea and Maya, over to you now as we look forward to your review of these different test modalities for SARS-CoV-2.
Okay, hello everyone. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can everyone see this? Yep. So hello, as Dr. Ford introduces, my name is Chelsea and my partner Maya, and we're going to be presenting on behalf of our research project done with Dr. Ramdas and a few other of our colleagues, and it's called A Comparison of Testing Modalities for SARS-CoV-2, a Comprehensive Review. So COVID-19 is severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, or SARS-CoV-2, as we will be referring to it. It emerged in Wuhan, China in late 2019. Since its emergence, there have been more than 47.5 million cases worldwide. This number was taken on Thursday of this week, so it might have grown. And with over a million estimated deaths thus far. Several measures have been implemented to curb the spread of the virus, including widespread testing, PPD, and proper sanitation. The need for rapid, accurate, and reliable screening tests is of paramount of importance, and many testing kits are available with varying accuracy and applicability. So our hypothesis was this: upon analysis of different screening and diagnostic tests for SARS-CoV-2, consistent values are expected among each examination in order to accurately assess the accuracy of available SARS-CoV-2 testing methods. Basically, what we were trying to see during this study is to see if the PCR should still remain as the gold standard or if some other form of testing could be better than it. So we took a bunch of different already published articles and we used PubMed and Science Direct searches. The specific keywords we inputted were COVID-19, sensitivity, specificity, accuracy, reliability, PPV, and NPV, as we will be referring to the positive predictive value and negative predictive value during our presentation. So we took the titles and the abstracts of these articles and screened them fully. We had over 1,000 articles that we actually screened, which is why there's so many students involved in this experiment. And the articles were categorized under different testing modalities. So we did the PCR, the NAT, as we'll be referring, or other nucleic acid amplification test, antibody testing, imaging, and leukocytes. And then we characterized each testing modality and it was recorded and compared with each other. The way that we recorded and compared was we took groups of 4 students and we each chose which testing to go under. So 4 did PCR, a couple did NAIT, and etc. So here are some of our findings.
Okay, so I'm Maya Hadid as they introduced me, and I'm just going to be taking us through these findings. So the first thing we're going to look at here is average parameters for each of the diagnostic tests. So if we look at the average sensitivity, we're going to note that the nucleic acid amplification, or NAT, has the highest average sensitivity, which is followed by PCR and then IgA. When we look at the average specificity, we're going to note that IgG actually has the highest average specificity, which is followed by NAT again, and then PCR is third. So when we're looking at the average PPV, the interesting thing that you might want to note about this is that PCR has one of the lowest values on this table. And we want to make sure that we reduce false positives and false negatives when discussing negative predictive values as much as possible. So you might wonder why our gold standard test has such a low average positive predictive value, but then later on when we discuss the true values, you'll see why this may be the case. So yeah, I discussed a little bit about negative predictive value again. None of the tests really do have that high of an average negative predictive value, except for the NAT and leukocytes. And then accuracy, hands down, NAT has the highest accuracy, it's 100%, meaning any value you get in between is just going to be 100%. Yeah, Chelsea, next slide, please. All right, so here we're looking at the number of articles per category. So this can also be a reason for maybe some discrepancies with some of the results that we found. As you can see, we have most of our articles taken from antibody, imaging, and PCR, and much fewer of them taken from nucleic acid and leukocytes. So as we were seeing in the table before with all the averages, we were seeing that nucleic acid amplification was given a pretty good competition to PCR as a potential like runner-up gold standard test. However, when we look at this table and we see that we took so many fewer articles from nucleic acid, then that could also be a reason why the results are looking that way as well. Right, so here we're looking at the maximum and minimum sensitivities and specificities. So when we're looking at the sensitivities now, we see that there are various tests that have a maximum sensitivity of 100, including PCR, including NAT, including various antibodies and imaging. But when we look at the minimum sensitivity, PCR has one of the lowest. It's 30% minimum sensitivity. And then again, we wonder why is our gold standard test having such a low minimum sensitivity? However, something that needs to be taken into consideration, not only discussing PCR, but discussing all the tests and all the different parameters, is that the time of contraction of the disease to the time of diagnosis of the disease may interfere with the testing. For example, if I were to contract COVID-19 today, yet I got tested tomorrow, my sensitivity or specificity of the test is not going to be as accurate as if I were to contract COVID today versus getting tested next week. So yes, that could be why some of these minimum and maximum values are looking this way, but again, we're not entirely sure. Chelsea, next one. Right, so here we're looking at minimum and maximum positive and negative predictive values. So when we're looking at maximum positive predictive values. We note that PCR does have a maximum positive predictive value of 100, although it does have a minimum positive predictive value of 1. However, as we were seeing before, that nucleic acid amplification test was kind of looking as if it was maybe better than PCR. We see that its maximum positive predictive value doesn't quite reach the 100, neither its negative predictive value. So this could be a reason why PCR is maintaining its status as the gold standard test for COVID-19. And the last thing I want to just touch on is the maximum minimum accuracies. We do see a few tests having maximum accuracies. However, nucleic acid amplification has 100% minimum accuracy and maximum accuracy. So it is hands down the best in terms of accuracy.
Okay, thank you, Maya. So with conclusion to that, there are different modalities to test for SARS-CoV-2, and they all have different accuracy, sensitivities, positive predictive values, etc. But the highest accuracy, and as Maya just said, the highest overall has been seen with NAT, and it's going to rank supreme to all other testing mechanisms. Although that NAT does have the highest accuracy, PCR still remains the gold standard, and that could possibly be due to its high PPV and NPV. And we're still trying to understand why people aren't using NAT as the gold standard, but I believe it could also be due to the fact that PCR is able to detect at least one nucleic or one polymerase chain that has SARS-CoV-2. So as long as you have one, PCR will detect it, while NAT does have different discrepancies and it varies. Personally, Maya and I did do the discussion over PCR, so we could talk a little bit more about that section. And mainly they are trying to find other types of PCR mechanisms that can be the new gold standard. But as of right now, just the real-time PCR remains the gold standard. And that could also just be due to the fact that they've already made this screening test for specific SARS-CoV-2, and it is at the hands of all of these labs. So sometimes due to the high PPV and the high NPV, accuracy might not be something that laboratories are going for. They're just going for something that's quick and fast and as reliable as possible for right now. And does anyone have any questions?
Hi guys, thank you very much for your presentation. Very relevant, of course, and very timely as well. My question is, I would like to understand the time frame of the references that you use for your data, especially in the context of understanding positive predictive value, because that value is not inherent to a test itself only, but really a fundamental construct of the prevalence of a disease in a population also. And over time of the COVID-19 pandemic, the prevalence would have changed over time and continues to change. So I would like to gain your perspective on when your data was sourced and what are some of your considerations, projections about these value associations of this test as prevalence of the disease changes.
Sure. So as Maya was saying, the NPV and the PPV could be changing dependent on when the testing was taken. We took publishings as recent as January 2020 and went all the way up to, I believe, September 2020 before we finished our publication. So it is a wide range of values, which is why there could be some skewities to our research samples.
Yes, and to add on to what Chelsea is saying, as well as you were saying about the prevalence, depending on where the people were when they did these research papers, it could change, as in if somebody was in New York versus somebody was in Grenada, of course, the prevalence is going to be much lower in Grenada. Therefore, the positive predictive value might just change depending on all these factors.
Yeah, when taking articles into consideration, we specifically just chose those keywords. So we didn't look for a specific part of the world. We have articles from China, we have articles from India, we have articles from Spain, Italy, all over the world. So like Maya said, if it's in Grenada, the prevalence is obviously going to be different than it's here where I'm from, New Jersey, where it's going to be a lot higher than that.
Definitely, completely agree with you. We have a question from Dr. Al Hassan. And his question is connected with PCR as considered the gold standard for testing. And his question is, are these values, when you're comparing them, are they compared with the different types of sampling strategies? So we have nasal swabs, and increasingly saliva is being used as well as a source of sampling. Can you comment on if these values are also dependent on the type of sample and not just the type of test?
No, so specifically, we just went based off of the test. Although I believe Maya did have some of the saliva samples in her discussion, so she could elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, in a couple of the papers that I looked at, we actually found that the nasal swabs versus saliva all had various different like testing capabilities. And it showed in a couple of the articles that we still need to find a better way to test, because these tests are still not giving us enough information to control the spread of this disease.
Thank you.
Yes, just to add on to that, it has been very difficult to find a test that is going to be reliable, as Maya just said. Even with our PCR discussion, we had, I believe, 60 articles that we had to go through just specific on PCR. And every single article was giving us different values, different explanations, different discussions as to why we should or shouldn't keep on using PCR. As I said, there are different mechanisms. They're speaking about the FAST test, which is a 15-minute test that should give you an accurate result. And even though it could be fast and it could be done within your home, it's, for some reason, it still hasn't been done. The specific article I'm speaking about, the study was done in India, and as we've all seen the numbers, the population and the prevalence there has just been rising day by day by day. So even though they do have this home test, it's still not as reliable, and it's not sufficient enough to stop the pandemic from occurring.